Well, welcome everyone to yet another webinar from Fortra. We're excited to be with you today to talk about an IBM product that really is a partner product with Fortra. Behind the scenes, we do level 3 support and all the net new development on this product, but IBM owns the go-to-market level 1, level 2 support. BRMS, Backup Recovery Media Services, is a product that works on many systems and is very popular around the globe. And so we thought it'd be great to have a session that was for beginners to get you started and then hit some advanced topics. We're only doing 2 hours, so we got a lot to cover. Today is going to be for really what we call for beginners, getting started with the product. We're really excited to have Sarah Jacob. Sarah, welcome to a Fortra webinar. First time joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's go on to the next slide. We have our intro slide. I'm Tom Huntington. I'm our Executive Vice President of Technical Solutions here at the Fortra company, longtime member of it. My expertise is I'm very much so familiar with backup and recovery, but I'm not necessarily a BRMS expert. So why not bring in somebody who helps implement and manage BRMS, and that's Sarah. So over to you, Sarah. What's your background here?
So I am technically the Vice President of Customer Services at Agile Technology Architects. And basically my job is, there's a slide in here you can look at if you want to read it all, but I am kind of the first line person who's doing all the system admin and backup recovery setups and plans for our customers. I'm a subject matter expert with Common on IBMi administration and the BRMS. So this is kind of really my niche here.
Excellent. Well, Sarah's gonna go through and do the bulk of the presentation today. I'm gonna just be out in the background here in case there's any issues. I'm gonna open up a polling question you should see up on your screen. How much experience do you have with BRMS? More than 10 years, 6 to 10 years, 1 to 5 years, less than 1 year, or none at all, which is perfectly fine. Take the survey. We'll leave it open here for just a little bit. One of the other things that Fortra puts out in the marketplace is the IBMi Marketplace Survey. We've done that for 10 years. Year 11 is coming up. We hope that you all can take some time. There's about 30 some questions you have to answer. But please take the poll again. It'll be open in September, around the 15th of September to November 1st. So very excited about that. And wow, really got a great response here on this first survey. So let me share that out to you. You'll see that we have people with a lot of experience. 23% said more than 10 years, 6 to 10 years, 21%, 1 to 5, 22. 16%, and then we have 17% with none. What a diverse set of customers we have with us, Sarah. What do you think about that?
Well, it's more than I expected of the experience for a beginner's class, but I'm happy to have you here. But BRMS is definitely something that has been around for a while, and it's just really, really useful. So I'm not surprised we have lots of folks who use it.
All right, very good. Back to you, Sarah.
Right. So let's go ahead and step into, this is our agenda for this meeting real quick. So we're just going to go into real quick is how do you know if it's been initialized and loaded on your system. We'll get into the configuration, talk about the policies that run it, the implementation. We're kind of going to stick the live demos together, so we won't really come back to the slides until we get into the media management. And then we'll talk about actually running the backup and go from there. All right, so let's jump in because we got a lot to cover in this hour. Like Tom said, BRMS stands for Backup Recovery and Media Services. It's built on top of IBM's native commands, mostly policy-based. For a full list of the different product options and what they mean, you can go to that website there. Originally, BRMS and shipped with 3 to 4 options. You had your base, which got you everything to run the backups. You had network, which was so you could put all the other systems together sharing a pool that we'll talk about tomorrow. And we had advanced, which allows a couple other things that we'll talk about tomorrow as well. Everything that we're talking about today would really be in the base package. The subscription-based one now has all of those packages together. So if you're on the subscription licensing, you've got everything, versus the old system of licensing, you had to have individual products. It installs like any other license program product. You can see here, if you look at your display, your license program products on this particular system, we've got the base, the network, and the advanced on there. You would add your license key and make sure it's on there. And then when you're first installing it, you'd run this initialized BRMS with the option run product initialization. It would go through, it would create a bunch of stuff for you, all of the defaults, so that you could actually start running BRMS right based off of that. You wouldn't need to do any configuration. But one of the great things about BRMS is that you really can configure it to your system. The only other initialized BRM thing I want to mention here is this star device. If you were to add a new tape drive onto your library or onto your system, like you bought a new VTL or something and you plugged it in, you'd run initialized BRM star device in order for BRMS to see that device and be able to use it. Okay. So getting into the configuration of it, right into it. BRMS is a policy-based system. Okay. You would go to Go BRMS, option 11. If that's not there, if you don't have all these policies listed, you can tell that your system hasn't been initialized and you need to do that. All right. A lot of the different policies here. If you do a work policy BRM star sys, it will bring up this screen, or you can go directly into any of those policies. For this demonstration, we're going to be using the menu so that you can see where we go instead of trying to keep up with all the commands that we're using. All right, I'm just going to switch over to a live one here. Can everybody see the screen? That looks like you can.
Looks great.
Perfect.
Looks great. Yep.
All right, so we're going to go BRMS. This is the initial screen. And see, it comes up. This is the main menu for BRMS. You have your media management, your backup, everything else. What we're going to look at when we're first setting BRMS up is our policies. So we'll go to 11. And that shows that policy screen that I had up earlier. Okay, the first one you set up is going to be your very base policy. That's the one that everything's going to default back to. You want to keep this one simple, but it's got everything to start. Okay, a lot of the other policies will kind of default back to this if you don't set something in there. So we'll go to 1. All right, and we are going to, for the purpose of this demo, we're just going to focus on 1 display or change system policy. All right, so you'll notice that this system is a V7R3 system. It happens to be the one that we had built in the moment, so that's why we're on it. This screen has not really changed since, so your V7R5 screens are going to look really similar, if not the exact same. It's been the same for a while. They've just added a couple other options. Okay. So the first thing we're going to look at is on the system policy is the media policies. Okay. So as you can see, this is an LTO5 policy. If I hit F4 to bring up all the ones that exist, it shows me every media policy that BRMS knows about. And I can select which one is going to be the base one that most of my saves are going to use. Okay. If I hit F9, it'll bring me right to the configuration for it. And you can see these policies were created by BRMS when it initialized. Okay, and you can use those to build off of, or you can create your own. Okay, if you create your own, you don't have to put text in, but I do usually do it just so that I have a little bit of extra knowledge of what I'm doing here, right? So the one that we saw on my system policy is this LTO5, so let's take a look at it. If you notice, so the first thing on here is the retention type. That's how long we're going to keep the stuff and save it. So in this case, you can choose a specific date that it's going to expire by. You can choose how many days, how many versions, or never expire unless manually expired, which would be permanent. Most of the time you're going to use days, you're going to use number of days. So your backup policies will specify you need to keep your daily stuff for 7 days, 14 days, and your weeklies for, say, 30 days. You would put that in here. Okay, so you'd have the type is date, and then how long you actually retain the media is right here. And you see this says 20 on it. It's actually a 21-day expiration period. Your retaining is an N-1, okay, for how many days you want to keep it. That is because tapes are expired by a job called BRMS maintenance, which normally runs right after the saves are done. That's normally when people set it up to save, but that's when the tapes are actually made available. So say today is the 14th, I think, right? If we have a tape and it's due to expire on the 14th, does maintenance run at 1 a.m. or does it run at 11 p.m.? So we normally would say that if the tape expires on that date, it's actually not available for the next one. Okay. Most of the time, saves that I've seen tend to run around midnight, 1 a.m., and then maintenance runs after that. So that's where that comes in. Okay. The next thing we look down is the move policy, if that is used. This used to be used more when we had all physical tapes, when you had to take your tapes and move them off site, and then or move them to a different location because you had multiple data centers and you were moving data between them. You could set up that move policy to say after 5 days, this tape has to be moved over to our other site, and then after 10 days there, it gets moved back, or however it works with that. And what would happen is you put your move policy in here, and then BRMS would create a report and says, okay, go ahead and here's your list of tapes that need to be picked up and taken. Okay. With VTLs and replication, I'm not seeing move policies getting used very often anymore. And in my base policy that I'm using for my system policy, I typically leave it at none because, like I said, I want to keep my system policy as simple as possible and make the control groups and the further on policies the more detailed. Okay. And that's the basics of your media policy. Okay. The other thing you can go down to is if you want to duplicate them. So we have some customers that they duplicate their monthly saves and then they send the monthly save offsite to comply with their audit requirements, but then they still keep it on site so that they can reference it. And this is where you could set that up to auto duplicate. Okay. And you notice in the text here it says 21-day rotation, so I know exactly what I'm talking for. Right, the next thing on our system policy is going to be a device. Now, if you notice, as soon as I made a change, the system came back and said, hey, there's a problem here. So if I do an F4 on this to show me the list of devices that exist, we'll see that tape MLB07 no longer exists. It existed when I made the system policy, but since I haven't changed it till now, it's going to force me to change that into something that will accept that will work with the LTO5s, or it won't let me save the system policy because it's got to be something that will work. It doesn't let you have an Altium 7 device with an LTO4 tape. It just doesn't let you do that. So I'm going to go ahead and change this over to tape MLB11 because I know that's my LTO6 drive. And there it goes. Here you notice there's multiple levels. You can put multiple devices here. What that will do is that will cause parallel backups to occur. If you want parallel backups, that's great. I still say don't put them in your system policy. Okay. Parallel backups can cause a much faster backup to run if you have a really big system that you're backing up. But then just be aware that when you recover your system, if you don't have both devices available or as many devices as you list here available, it's going to slow down your recovery because you're going to be sitting and swapping tapes back and forth for your one device or whatever it is. Okay. The other thing is these devices must be initialized by BRMS. So that's where that initialized BRMS star device comes in if you add a new tape library on. Okay. All right, next thing we're going to look at is location. Now, location is, the devices are physical, actual, real devices. The locations are the mind of BRMS. This is the database. It doesn't have to match the physical, and you can create as many locations as you want. So when we look here, you can see we've got star home. That's kind of the default one that BRMS creates as a catch-all for if you don't know where to put it. It creates a location for every tape library that you've initialized in the past. It does not automatically delete them if the tape library disappears. Okay, and then you can create your own that have absolutely nothing to do with a tape library. For example, we have credenza here. We had a locking credenza that we would put some tapes in and throw a tape in there and lock it up, and we'd know that that's where it was if we needed to go look for it. Okay. You can have as many as you want. It doesn't have to match up unless you're actually trying to use that tape in that moment. Okay. If you want to be able to use the tape for a save, it has to have the location set to match the device. Okay. This was really helpful when you did have move policies where you were moving tapes from place to place, or if you have physical tapes that you send to like offsite and they're not replicated tapes, they're the actual tapes that are gone, to keep track of where everything is. Okay. If we hit F9 on here, we can see all the different things. We can create a new one just by simply adding a thing and naming it. And we don't have to have anything. You can put an address in here if you want. You can say that while they're at this location, they cannot be expired, even if the expiration date comes up, you know, whatever you want to do. And boom, there it is. Okay. So that is the locations as far as the system policy goes. The next thing is the media class. Media class is created by BRMS. You can create your own, although we generally just take the ones that were created by BRMS initialization. Once again, if you hit F4, you can take a look at them all. Obviously, our system has a lot of old tape styles on it, because this is one of our ones that we use for customers on older versions, obviously. And sometimes they have older tape drives. So you can look, these are all created by BRMS when those devices are there. You can create custom classes if you want. I usually stick to just creating custom media policies that use the class rather than trying to create a different class. If you wanted to create a custom class, like for your journal tapes, you can do that. You just have to tell what density it is, and the density has to be one that has been initialized by BRMS. Okay. All right. Next thing to look at on the system policy is this one right here, sign off interactive users. I would set that to star no on your system policy, always. If you want to sign off users for a backup, that's fine. Do it in the control group where you actually know it's happening and can see it real up close, rather than trying to set it in your default policy and then wind up getting a ton of phone calls as people get kicked off the system because the dev wanted to save his test library, started a save, and it went, oh, he didn't set down whether or not we're going to do that. We're going to go back to the default, and yep, we're kicking everybody off so he can save his test library. We don't want that. So make sure that this is always set to no. Okay. Next thing to look at on here, that's we wouldn't take as a default, it'd be the auto enroll media. What this says is that if there is a tape added to the library, then go ahead and add it to the Mind of BRMS, add it to the database. Okay. This works really well if you want to create a bunch of new virtual tapes and you don't want to take the time to go and manually add them into BRMS. The only downside is if you ever get a tape from a different partition that's not in the network or a different system, it will automatically add it if you have that on there. So as an example for why we have it set to no, we have a customer who, due to security constraints, is not able to get out to the internet at all to download PTFs. They're also not allowed to use USBs on their system, so we can't put the PTFs on a USB. So what we have to do is we have to download the PTFs to our system, save them to a tape, drive the tape over physically, and then load it back up. If they had this auto enroll on, the Agile tape that we brought our PTFs over on would be added to their BRMS database every time we did that. We sometimes at Agile get tapes for people to do recovery testing, so we leave ours set at no. In your environment, you can decide whether or not you want it to be auto-enrolled or not. Next thing on the system policy to look at is this controlling subsystem, allow backups in batch. What that does is, do you want to run a restricted state save, an unattended one, where it takes the whole system down and saves the whole system, including the operating system and all that? You can submit it to the controlling subsystem, and then it goes, okay, and it's going to just take the system down and run the backup right there in the controlling subsystem. If this is set to yes, it allows that. If you do that, the console is not available while the backup is running. It's not going to show you if there's any errors that you need to deal with, because it's just going to be a black screen. And you cannot get into it unless you break in through using the panel or using the HMC. We typically suggest that you use the BRMS console instead. The downside of the console is you have to have someone log on and make sure the console is up and running, the BRMS console. But you know, it's a lot of people like having it be submitted to the batch, to the controlling subsystem, because then they don't have to worry about, did somebody make sure the BRMS console is up? Okay. If you have this set to yes, always make sure your restricted state time limit is set. Don't leave it at no max. The default is no max, don't leave it at that. Because in that case, like say there's a tape not available, it's just gonna go ahead and sit there with no console and no access to the system until you break in, if you don't have a time limit on it. So what we suggest is that if you're going to submit your backup to the controlling subsystem, set a time limit on it. So this, say, assume how long your backup for a full system save takes 3 hours. Set your restricted time limit for 4 hours, okay? That way, no matter what, when it gets to the end of that 4 hours, whether the backup completed or not, the system's gonna say, okay, it's gonna end that job and bring the system back up and you will have access again, okay? So that's just something to note if you have that as a yes. Make sure you've got a time limit on there, because you don't want to be trying to break into it with dedicated service tools or, you know, having to drive in and use the panel. Okay. In order to do that, you do need to specify your save sys or your all. That's how BRMS knows that it's a restricted state save. And we'll get into that more once we get into the control groups. Okay. All right, next thing we're going to look at on here is going to be just this volume prefix. If you auto enroll your volumes, you can have the prefix on there as well. Okay. All right, so that's the basics of the system policy. I usually leave everything else as its default because I don't want to really get too much into detailing it until I get into the control groups. That's where I really want the details and the minute control. Okay. All right, so the next policy to look at, so now we're kind of stepping out of the implementation and into configuration, is setting up the backup policy. And this is where the start of actually running a backup comes in. Okay. So if we look at number 2, it only has 2 options. This backup policy sits right on top of the system policy. So as we look at it, you'll see it defaults back to that system policy for the media policy, the devices, okay? So that's where knowing what's in that system policy and having it set up is helpful. Okay, I usually leave these at system policy, and then in my control groups later on, I'm gonna go ahead and refocus those again, so I only have one place to change it if I do make a change. All right, one thing to note on here that's on here that was not on the system policy is the default weekly activity. This is saying when I do a save, do I save the whole object or do I just save changes to the object? Okay. On my backup policy, since this is again just the next step up from the system and there's going to be a control group on top of that, I set it to full because I would rather default to getting the whole object rather than defaulting to getting just changes, because I want to make sure that my recovery time is going to be smaller. Okay. The default weekly activity starts with Sunday, and it's got one space for each weekday, and you can determine what's there if it's full or incremental. If it's blank, like here, if I put a blank in there, that means on Saturday, no backup activity will run. Even if I have a backup scheduled, it'll say, oh, but I'm not saving anything today, and drop. And that'll be the end of it. Okay. So I leave that all on there, and then I let my control groups control that. Incremental type. This is important. This is going to tell you, if you do use incremental, that's going to tell you what kind of incremental save it is. So there's cumulative and there's incremental. If you do the star incremental, what you're going to do is you're going to say your anchor point, your full save is on Sunday. It's going to save the changes between Sunday to Monday, and Monday to Tuesday, and Tuesday to Wednesday, and so on, right? It's going to keep your backup window very small because it's only changing differences. But what it does to the recovery is then your recovery is you're going to put down Sunday's tape, and then you're going to lay down Monday's tape, and then Tuesday's, and so on and so forth. Okay? Whereas with a cumulative type incremental save, your anchor point is Sunday. It's going to save the changes between Sunday and Monday, and then it's going to save the changes between Sunday and Wednesday, or Sunday and Friday. Okay? The downside of using it that way is that by Friday, if you have a lot of changes on your system, you might be almost doing another full save on Friday. So your backup window is not quite as concise, but it does make your recovery period a lot easier because then you're laying down Sunday and Friday day or Thursday, whatever day you have to restore to instead of having multiple. We usually go with cumulative just because we're looking at the recovery side of it, but it's entirely dependent on your system and your environment. Okay. This forceful backup right here is the next one down. That's saying if you do have incremental saves, you can set it where if for some reason the full save got missed and you haven't had a full save of that system in say 14 days, so 2 weeks, you could say, no, we're going to go ahead and have a save of the full object. Okay, this is object level, not system level, but object level. We want to save the whole object on that next save no matter what. Even if it's supposed to be an incremental day because it's Thursday, we're going to have a full save. And the reason for that is, like, say you only do full object saves on Sunday, and then you do your incremental the rest of the week. Well, Sunday there was a problem with the tape library, it went down, you never got it. Now your recovery period is the Sunday before that week, and then getting up to where you are. For some customers that gets a little long, they don't want to have that long of a recovery process, so you put in your forceful backup dates. Again, here you have sign off your interactive users as an option. You can override the system policy or you can refer back to it. In this case, it's referring back to it. So do you know what your system policy says? You can leave it at that, or you can change it to no and say, I don't care what the system policy says. We're not going to sign people off without me knowing about it. Okay. I like having it no. I like controlling who I'm signing off in the control group, so I know exactly which save is going to sign people off. The next one to look at is the saving journaled objects. So if you have that set to no, what's going to happen is that any tables that you have journaled are not going to be saved during the save process. It's going to say that you're relying on your journals in order to do any recovery for that. It requires that your journaling be extremely robust, that you're backing up your journals somewhere else, or that you have remote journals enabled, and that you're really aware of what's going on with that. We always recommend setting that to yes, but it's entirely up to you for your recovery side, how you want to recover, if you want to be able to recover the objects or if you want to use those journals to recover them. Okay. Next thing on the backup policy is updating the history. So when you save an object, do you want it to update the object? So When you do a display object, it says last saved this date here. If you have yes, it's going to go ahead and do that. If you have no, it's going to leave it. And then you might have some unhappy auditors to say, well, this object says it hasn't been saved in, 3 months. Well, no, I saved it last night, but it's not showing it. Okay, so we usually leave that as a yes, so that we know exactly when it was last saved just by looking at the object instead of having to go dig into the BRMS database to look at when it last was saved. Use the defaults on the rest of it. We have another one here, IPL after backup. That's once again going back to the system policy. Do you want to rely on that, or do you want to change it here to no and focus on setting that in the individual saved control groups? And the last thing I want to mention on here is this asynchronous bring. It defaults to yes now. It used to on older versions of BRMS, it used to default to no. We always had to go in and change it. This will decrease the speed of your backup by 30 to 40%. Well, increase the speed, sorry. It'll make the window smaller because essentially what it does is it uses memory to retrieve the object while it's writing the header to the tape. So it just speeds everything up. We always suggest it be yes. And then only change it to no in specific instances where there's a requirement for it. All right, and that's the end of the backup policy. The next thing to look at with the backup policy is one that makes some IBM folks look at me like I'm crazy. And it's items to omit when you're running your daily backups. I will always omit performance data from my daily backups that are meant for recovery. Because when you're in a situation where you just want to recover your system, the performance data is not necessary. And because you have to stop performance auditing from running in order to save it, most people want to know what their performance is while the backup's running too, right? And it causes all sorts of errors in it. So I just omit that from the daily backup that's meant for recovery purposes, okay? And then I save it later in its own backup, its own control group, at a time where I can shut down performance collection, save my performance data, and then start collection back up again. But I really don't need it in the event of a recovery, okay? So I'm going to omit it from the daily saves. All right, so that is the backup policy. The next thing we're going to step into from here, the next level up. So we started with the system, that's the base, then the backup. Now we're going to get into the control groups. This is where you're actually saying, what am I backing up? Where, when, what am I, and I'm going to run it with this. So you get back to the menu for BRMS. You go to 2 for backup, backup planning, and then work with control groups. All right. The ones that are created for you are these 3 right up here. Okay. IBM is going to provide for you back up the entire system, back up just the system, the OS, and back up just the user data. And you can run off of those if you want. They're good starting places. I'm usually going to say that if you're looking at these, then make a copy of it for your full system save so that you can change everything and don't have to risk an update or PTF changing this for you, right? Okay, so when you're looking at a control group, see for the example, this is saving the entire system. It's the default one that BRMS sends. You can see the default activity here. It's going right back to the backup policy. So what did we set there? The weekly activity default action here refers back to the default activity up here, which is now referring back to the backup policy. Okay. You can individualize the activity for each of the different sections of your backup, or you can leave it as the default for the entire control group. Okay. So here on this exit is a backup item. And what it does is it allows you to come over here and say, if you want to send a message out to the message queue or a certain group saying, hey, the backup's going to start, sign off, save your stuff. You can do that here. With exit points though, anything you put in that command cannot require a response, okay? And hope it doesn't need error checking because BRMS isn't gonna check. It's just gonna run it and say, okay, I'm moving on, okay? Save sys is one of those objects that, or special items I said that says that you need a restricted state. So this is where BRMS is going to see that and go, oh, okay, I'm going to kick everybody off and shut down the system, quiesce it. I don't want to have anything running. I want a restricted state so I can save this. Okay. Star IBM is going to be all the IBM stuff. And then you have all your user libraries, all your documents. Star link is your IFS, and it's going to save all that. Notice the save while active is all set to no because this is a restricted state save, so we don't have to worry about if somebody's using it. Okay. And then the object detail here, we'll get into a little more tomorrow, but that's really saying what details of the objects I'm saving am I going to have available in my database. Okay. All right, so in my daily, I want to show you here, I have my daily save that runs. It's a full Sunday and incremental the rest of the week, so it's only going to save changes. Okay. I'm doing save security data and save configuration. What this does is it allows me to save some information about the system, like user profiles, authorities, and that without having to do a restricted state save. Okay. Then I'm going to save all of my user libraries. I am going to do a save while active, so people can be using these. BRMS is going to go get what's called a checkpoint, and then it's going to save that and then let people use it again, so it won't have a lock on it forever. I'm going to save my IFS next. Once again, I'm going to do save while active. It's going to go ahead and keep track of a checkpoint, and then it's going to save and let people use that object again. When you do save while active, you do have to have a message queue. It defaults to, I think, QSysOper, but you definitely want to set up a message queue just for your backups so that all your messages are in one place. And just set it to star print or star print wrap or star wrap or star print wrap so that when it fills up, it doesn't kill your backups. Okay. All right. One thing I have here on the webinar I want to show you is, see, this is a backup item called all test, and all of these different types of things are available. You know that website I sent you to at the beginning that I linked on there? This is all documented on there. If you go in, you can find the different control group entries that'll tell you exactly what they save. All right, all test means that all libraries that are attributed as test libraries are going to be saved in this backup control group. So if your libraries are attributed correctly, not only can your developers debug without affecting other systems or without needing all object authority, you can also run a control group to save just your developer libraries. They can run saves whenever they like without affecting production. Okay. So, and then we talked about journaling earlier. A couple of the special objects for journaling is right here, this all changed receivers and all detached receivers. So if I want to save my journals, because I don't have remote journaling, but I want to rely on journaling for getting some data, I'm going to have a journal saved like this. It's going to save all journal receivers that have never been saved or have changed since their last save, and all detached journal receivers that have never been saved or that have changed since they were last saved. In libraries that don't start with Q. Okay, this is an important part because if you want to save your journal receivers, they cannot be in QSys. This is especially an issue when it comes to like security auditing journals because the journal itself has to be in QSys, but the receivers can be put in a different library. We usually recommend one called @journlib because that makes it one of the first ones to get restored. And then that makes the journaling easier because the receivers are already there when the journals are restored, and it's just makes life a lot easier. But whatever library you put them in, as long as it doesn't start with a Q. All right.
You're doing good, Sarah. You probably need a little break, but following you along very nicely. A lot of great content.
Okay.
And I should
Sounds
mention,
good.
we have a lot of questions in the Q&A. We'll try to get to some of those today. We might follow up with them tomorrow, or for sure we'll get back to you via email as customers.
Yep. That's good. Okay. Moving on. Oh, okay. Oops, I am in the wrong zone. Sorry about that. All right. So when we look at backups, there's one I wanted to show you here. Is it on this system? I don't have it on here. Okay. So if I want to do software encryption on my daily save, because my data needs to be encrypted, my auditor said so. And for some reason, I don't want to use the encryption on the tape library because I'm using physical tape. You can go over, and there's this section right here, this encryption column. If you set up your key store in BRMS, which is an advanced topic, not really necessary here, just mentioning it, this is where you would set it to actually use that encryption, okay? We normally recommend using your VTL encryption just because it tends to be faster. And the other thing is, if you lose your key store for BRMS, not even IBM can break into it. I doubt Fortra would be able to either, just because of the way it's set up. So if you lose that key store, your Mylar is useless. So if you are going to encrypt, make sure that key store is available. Okay. But that's the only other thing I wanted to mention in this side of the group. Okay, so this is where your control groups are. You have them set up. And then you could go into your scheduling program, whether you use Advanced Job Scheduler or the regular job scheduler or a different one like Robot or a different scheduler, whatever program it is that you're going to schedule your backup. You're going to go in and you're going to set it up. Now this one's held for a reason, because for tomorrow I set something up. But you would go in and you would take a look, you'd set it up, you'd call it by its name, say, okay, who's going to run it? And then the command here is start BKU BRM control group. And are you going to submit the job to batch? This is where you would set controlling subsystem if it's a restricted state save that we talked about earlier. Also, you can say no, you just want it to run exactly where it is, or so in whatever job queue if you're running it. But that's how you would schedule it to run. Okay, you put it in your job schedule, however, there with that command. I have one in both. You can see it's here, scheduled to run at 9 o'clock every day. This one doesn't get submit to batch, right? It's just good. Okay. So what's missing here? What's missing here is our media. So we're going to briefly go back to our slide deck here. Okay. Usually we're using tape. Right now, most often virtual tape is the most popular. It's faster, it's more secure. You don't have to risk physical degradation of the tape, like Mylar does eventually give out, but some auditors still require physical tape. Okay. There's a couple different ways of doing virtual media with BRMS. You can use the internal virtual tape. That's got some issues for a lot of reasons, mainly disk performance and space allocation. We usually recommend virtual tape libraries. That's kind of where a lot of folks are going. Cybernetics, data domain. Oh, I'm blanking on the other one that we normally use. There's a lot of different ones out there, and they all look the same.
Laser Vault, DSI, Laser Vault, you know, et cetera, et cetera. There's quite a few out there.
Yeah, and they all look the same to BRMS. They all look like a tape library. It doesn't matter. Okay. Work-Mead BRM is where you work with a database. That's the mind of BRMS. It doesn't necessarily have to match up to the physical tapes that you have. Okay. If you're using physical tapes, initialize a tape exactly one time. Otherwise, you will lose a lot of the history, error checking, that type of thing on it. Okay. There are some of the VTLs that use initialization as storage management because they don't care about read-write errors history because it's a disk, right? So this is what the work with media screen looks like. And it's listing everything. Now you can see this is a V7R4 system, but we do have LTO3 tapes on there. That is because our system, we use a lot of older systems to recover. We have a lot of options for our customers, so we just have a lot. Yours will be whatever is set up for yours, okay? And you can have data in here from 10 years ago that you don't even have the tapes anymore if you haven't cleaned it up. BRMS is gonna hold on to it for you, okay? So I think we're gonna go back into the live demo here. So give me one moment while I pull that up. Okay. All right, so work BRM. So if you notice, this has some of the same tapes on there, even though it's a different system. That's because we're networked, and we'll talk about that more tomorrow. But what this does is it shows the volume name, the status, is it expired, is it active, when was it created, when is it going to expire? You know, here's a permanent one, it's stored in our credenza, right? And this is the type it is and when it was last moved. It keeps all of that data in there and you can look at all of this, okay? So use tape mobile 4, okay, that means that it's not really available to be used. These tapes right here showing in tape mobile 11, that's the tape library we actually have connected to our system. Those tapes are available for running our daily saves, okay? All right, if you want to add media, there's a couple ways to do it. You can do a 1 and then type in your serial name, okay? And now we're gonna go ahead and add it. We can add our media class. So let's say it's an Ultrium 6 tape that I've got. With number to add, you can add up to 999 at a time, as long as they're sequential. So you can't have a break in it like you want 9,002, 9,004, 9,006. You can't do it that way. You'd have to do it one at a time. But if you want to do 9,002 through 9,900, you could do that. It would do it all at once. You can choose to initialize the media at the same time you're adding it to BRMS if this is a new tape. I recommend doing that. As this tape doesn't actually exist, I'm not going to do that right now. Okay. You can set an expiration date on it and say that it's going to expire at some point in the future. So like if I say this is going to expire on the 25th of this year on Christmas, I'll set it up there. And I'll say that this tape was saved from recovery test. Okay. And I will be able to save it. Okay. Now it's created, it exists. I can scroll down and look at it. Okay. And see how it's showing active of December 24th date. I did not put it in a location, so it defaulted to home. And it exists. And the one thing that's really kind of fun is that if I try to remove it, it's going to say, no, that tape is active information on it. We refuse to remove it from our tape library or from our database, even though that tape doesn't actually exist. I just made it up. Okay. So there are some protections in there to keep you from losing data if the system's active. Okay. But that's how you would add it in there. Sorry about that. So that is how you would add media to it. The other thing to note is, so if you want to get back to that add media screen without going through and doing the 1 on it, you can just do add med BRM, hit F4, and it brings you the same screen. Note your volume identifier should absolutely match your barcode, and your media class has to match what it actually is. So you can say that it's an LTO4 tape when it's really an LTO6 tape, but as soon as BRMS tries to use it, it's going to have a bunch of errors and say, nope, 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 we're not going to do this. Okay. Let's see, I think that's everything for tapes. So So when we look at the tapes, the only thing we're going to note is if you want to use it, like I said, your location has to match the tape library when you're actually going to use it. When you're not using it, when it's just storage, the location is whatever you want to make it. Okay. All right. So that kind of finishes up that. We'll get back into our live demo here, or our slides. The only other thing to mention is when you want to run BRMS maintenance, you want to create your recovery reports. These are all the reports that take all that information that's in the database, the mind of BRMS, and it's going to put it together and it's going to say, this is what you need in order to recover. Okay? You want to take a full copy of that full recovery report and you want to move it off-site, whether that be to a different file server, an email, a physical copy. If you have physical tapes, you want to send a hard copy with your off-site tapes, but you want to be able to find it because in the event of an emergency, that's going to walk you through rebuilding your system. And we'll talk about that more tomorrow. Okay. BRMS maintenance is something that, actually, let me show you real quick how to get into that. So BRMS maintenance is start mate BRM. Okay. Normally, I run this immediately after my backups, and you can set it for what it does. It's going to expire media. Media set volumes is if you are appending tapes, what it'll do is it'll go and break it. It'll say this tape 3 has data from Tuesday and Wednesday on it. This tape has data from Wednesday and Thursday, and this tape has Thursday. Well, I don't need my Tuesday, Wednesday stuff anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and expire this one, but these two are still active because they're still in use, or their expiration date hasn't been reached yet. If you're not appending, you don't need to worry about that one. It cleans up your logs. You can print your media reports. You can print your recovery reports right here. This one is important. So when you run BRMS maintenance, it'll automatically print your recovery reports for you. So since we run maintenance every day, let your recovery reports be printed right then. Okay. And then you can reorganize your BRMS database by submitting it to batch, so it's not holding up any of your BRMS stuff. Right here, that's a new feature that we like because reorganizing the database can take a little bit and nothing else BRMS can run while that's going on. So it just kind of releases that job. All right. We had a customer who only ran BRMS once a month. They weren't reorganizing the files, so they weren't submitting that reorg, and they weren't purging old data. And their Q user BRM library got so large, they actually wound up needing multiple tapes for their backups, strictly because of Q user BRM. There were some other factors involved, but BRM maintenance was one of the main one. So make sure that maintenance is running at least, preferably daily, but at least weekly, okay? But that maintenance is also what gives you your up-to-date recovery report, so it's really important to have that run. Okay, and just some final thoughts from me is that we always want to make sure that you're planning your recovery before doing any of this, because setting up your backups and what you're going to save and when you're going to save it and how you're going to save it, all that depends on your recovery point requirements, your point requirement and your time requirement for recovery. Okay, what's your recovery point requirement? Do you have to be able to get to the middle of the day on Wednesday if a disaster happens on, say, Thursday night? Or, how far back do you need to go? If you get a tornado that comes through, like that just happened down by us, we had a tornado. When you bring your system back up, if you have to restore it, what point do you need to get to? Can you handle just being the night before? Or do you have to get to the time that the tornado actually went through? That's part of setting up your backup and scheduling when it goes and how it goes. Your recovery time. If you only give yourself a little backup window, you're going to need a much longer recovery window. So if your insurance says you will be back online in 3 hours or 6 hours or whatever it is, you need to make sure that your backup covers that, because you can have a long backup window and a shorter recovery window, or you can have a longer recovery window and a shorter backup window. You need that time. Okay. We're going to talk tomorrow about auditing your backup to make sure it really is what I think it is, and testing your recovery. Make sure it gets tested, because they don't work out that well. And test for like the middle of the week. Don't test for your Sunday after your full backup. We know that's going to work. Test your middle of the week. Make sure you get what you want. All right. And so that is everything for the basics of BRMS here. I'm going to turn this over to Tom to talk a little bit about some of the things that go along with your backups and making sure you can recover.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and an excellent job. Looking forward to tomorrow. We have lots of questions out there. I don't know if you maybe can look at them now while I chat for just a little bit. Just to remind you again, in the annual IBMi Marketplace survey, we do ask about what customers are doing with high availability. The nice thing with, and backups, I should say, the nice thing with IBMi, you have choices. You have virtual tape libraries, you have tape. Not a bad thing having tape with all the ransomware threats out there, because it's a disconnected backup, right? So we got something we can recover from, and it's not encrypted, or like maybe a cloud-based backup or something like that. So virtual tape libraries, and of course then we have HA. We have high availability software-based replication, which goes very nicely with backup and recovery and covers that point of a quicker RTO, recovery time objective. And then, of course, you also have Power HA, and Fortra also works on that technology. You also have full system replication, lots of hardware replication options today too. So if you go to the next slide, one of the things that you may or may not know is that the Fortra company has gotten into high availability. Also, we have a product called Robot HA. It takes advantage of the journaling and remote journaling that's built into IBMi, as Sarah has talked about. Just note that we are an option out there for you. And what I'm going to do, if you want to go to the next slide, Sarah, this is everything that, oh, actually, I'm going to do the polling question, launch that up for you. Fortra's here to help you out. We do a lot of one-on-one calls, do technology updates, executive briefings with our customers. We're an alternative out there for business intelligence, data access, HR and HA and DR concerns, document management around IBMi, and cybersecurity, of course. And if you want, take advantage of our free cybersecurity scan that we have. So I'm gonna leave that polling question up there for a little bit. Sarah, looking over at some of the questions, many were related to, are you recording this? The answer is yes, we are. We will certainly have this as a playback option for you. Do you see anything out there that you want to point out from the questions, Sarah? I think Michael had a good tip, is that you can do email and notification and some of the exit points ahead of in BRMS, and that's a great tip.
Yep. So the emails and that I was going to mention tomorrow, because we talk about auditing and monitoring your backup tomorrow.
Okay, good.
So that's a great point, Michael. But yeah, I wasn't going to bring it up today. So.
And then there was a question about that forceful backup. Could you please elaborate? That's where you were talking about accumulative and incremental backups, and the difference there.
So what that is so the difference is, so when you're saying, we're talking about whether it's a full or incremental backup, we're talking about the object level. So are we saving the whole object as it is, even if it hasn't changed? So like, say you have a PDF that hasn't been touched. Are we going to save that PDF each time? Or are we only going to save it if it was changed later? Okay. So the forcing the full backup is saying that if you're using incremental saves and for some reason you miss your full save, something happens, the tape library is not working, you have a hardware failure, whatever it is that you miss it, and now you have just incremental saves going on for, you've only had the changes to the object. So it doesn't save the whole object, it just saves the changes. So like in that PDF, if they changed one line, that line is all that was saved on the incremental save rather than the whole PDF. Okay. So what the forceful backup is saying is that after 10 days, 30 days, whatever, however long you want to set that, if I don't have a full system, if I don't have that full object, that whole PDF saved, I want a fresh copy of that object. I want a fresh copy of that PDF saved, so I don't have to go back and apply all these changes that were saved earlier.
Very good.
Hopefully that makes sense. If you have,
If you can move ahead to one slide, go ahead and do that.
Yep.
And then this is everything Fortra does. I'm not going to go through that right now, but I thought I should throw that up in front of you. We had a question about versioning. How are versions operated and when do they expire? From Andreas. So I think he's talking media versions, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're talking about the versions, like instead of using number of days, you're talking about versions. You set the number of versions you want to keep, and it will, BRMS is going to say, okay, well, here's your first save, that's version 1, and then you save it again, that's version 2, and then you save another change one, that's version 3, and you have 3 versions saved. The next time that object gets saved, this one is going to drop off. So that first one's going to drop off. So you'll only have 3 copies of it. So you'll have the current minus and then the 2 minus or whatever it is. Okay.
Yeah, it's an automated way of getting rid of old backups that you no longer need. You know, like you're doing a daily backup, right? So you can have multiple versions of that. Cool. You know, you want to hit a few more questions? Are you okay being over the top of the hour? Okay.
Yep. So I see a question about cloud. I'm not going to be discussing BRMS in the cloud. That's kind of its own whole session. So that isn't something that I'm going to bring up tomorrow. We've got networking and some other advanced features that we're going to go over instead. But feel free to email me and we can discuss it, you know, offline.
Let's bring up your contact information. So in case somebody wants to reach out to you directly, Sarah.
Absolutely. So there you go.
And
so that's
some people are asking about the new GUI. I put that out there too. So I apologize. I jumped right over you.
No, that's okay. So you know more about the new GUI anyway, but the new GUI is out. Well, I think it's out with the subscription pricing. So, okay.
Yeah.
So if you have BRM2, excuse me, which is the subscription license-based product, you will get a GUI for BRMS. It's really cool. We've got a little demo of it tomorrow. But it is only available on the subscription-based license program product. It is not going to be available on the older product. It's got everything that was on the previous Navigator, plus a little bit more. It's really cool. I like it a lot. But we will definitely show that for you.
So then we have a question about duplication. Can you duplicate a volume from LTO4 to LTO9, for example, different media types?
I will have to double check that. I don't normally duplicate to different media types. Normally when I'm duplicating it to another tape of the exact same type that's going to go off, because the reason is normally you're setting it up so that you can restore your system, and that's the type you're going to have. I'd have to double check on that one.
Okay. Well, we'll do this, Sarah. We'll get the Q&A from today over to you during the day here, so you can take a look at that in case there's something you want to follow up with tomorrow. But we thank all of you for joining us today. It's been a lot to go through in the initial session. I knew we'd have a lot of great questions too. And on behalf of Fortra, Sarah, thank you so much for doing this webinar and agreeing to do it. And we look forward to tomorrow.
Thank you. We'll look forward to seeing you.
All right. Have a good day.
You as well.